Blood splattered across the pristine metal walls as claws raked through alien flesh. And in that moment of savage desperation, the universe learned why Earth had once been feared. The creature they had dismissed as a mere specimen, a relic from a dead world, moved with predatory grace that spoke of millennia of evolution, of survival carved into bone and sinew. His enhanced muscles coiled like springs as he landed silently on the laboratory floor, amber eyes blazing with intelligence that should have been impossible, watching three Zephyrian scientists stumble backward in terror as they realized their fatal mistake. They had tried to dissect him while he was awake. Max's enhanced hearing caught the whispered prayer of the youngest scientist, words in a dialect he had learned during months of careful observation. The alien was begging their gods for mercy, not understanding that mercy was a concept this Earth dog had learned from a species that no longer existed. His nostrils flared, processing the complex cocktail of pheromones flooding the sterile chamber, fear and regret and desperate hope mingling with the metallic tang of fresh blood. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across his muscular frame, highlighting the surgical scars that told the story of endless experimentation, of a creature studied but never understood. The lead scientist, Dr. HFY, clutched a neural probe in his trembling appendage, the device still humming with malevolent energy. Moments earlier, it had been poised to slice through Max's prefrontal cortex, to map the neural pathways that made him more than just an animal. The Zephyrian's compound eyes dilated with shock as he stared at the restraints that should have held any ordinary creature, now twisted and broken like discarded wire. But Max was no ordinary creature, and this was no ordinary moment of reckoning. The space station Kepler 442 hummed around them with the constant vibration of life support systems, artificial gravity generators, and the endless cycling of recycled atmosphere. Somewhere in the vast structure that housed representatives from a dozen alien species, alarms would soon be screaming. Security forces would mobilize. The hunt would begin. But in this sterile laboratory, suspended in the cold void between stars, time seemed frozen as three alien scientists faced the last living remnant of a world they had helped to destroy. Max's enhanced vocal cords produced a sound that had never been heard in this part of the galaxy, a low growl that carried the weight of extinction, the echo of a blue world where dogs had once run free through meadows that smelled of rain and morning dew. The sound spoke of loyalty bred into DNA, of courage that had walked alongside humanity for thousands of years, of love that transcended species and now found itself alone in the darkness between worlds. The youngest scientist dropped his scanner, the device clattering against the metal floor with a sound like breaking bones. His species communicated through color-shifting skin patterns, and right now his hide displayed the deep purples and blacks of absolute terror. He had read the files, studied the data from humanity's final days, but reading about genetic enhancement was different from facing a creature whose every cell had been optimized for survival. Dr. HFY tried to speak, his translator struggling with words that had no equivalent in most galactic languages. Subject exhibits unprecedented neural activity. Cognitive functions exceed parameters. The words dissolve in a static as Max's enhanced muscles bunched beneath his coat, dark fur rippling with potential energy. His amber eyes never left the neural probe, that instrument of violation that had been intended to strip away the last mysteries of Earth's children. They had wanted to understand how humanity had created him, how they had taken a species already perfect in its loyalty and made it capable of thinking, reasoning, feeling with the complexity of their own kind. They had never asked if he wanted to be understood. The laboratory stretched around them, a cathedral of scientific arrogance filled with specimens from dead worlds. Preserved creatures floated in tanks of blue-green fluid, their lifeless eyes staring at nothing. Charts covered the walls, genetic sequences and neural maps of species that would never again feel sunlight on their backs or breathe the air of their homeworlds. This was where civilizations came to be cataloged, dissected, filed away in the great library of galactic knowledge. But Max was alive, and in his enhanced mind burned memories of a world that still lived in him, a planet of impossible blue skies and endless green fields where creatures like him had once been called by a simple, beautiful name, friend. The second scientist, an insectoid creature whose species name translated roughly to those who remember, clicked his mandibles in rapid staccato bursts. His kind were the galaxy's archivists, devoted to preserving the knowledge of extinct civilizations. He had studied Earth longer than most, had mapped its weather patterns and analyzed its soil composition, had cataloged every species that had called it home. But he had never understood the bonds that held its creatures together, the invisible threads of loyalty and love that had made Earth more than just another world. The specimen shows cognitive enhancement beyond our projections, he chattered, his translator rendering emotion as cold analysis. Genetic modifications indicate deliberate intelligence augmentation, probably performed during the final evacuation attempts. Neural pathways suggest not just enhanced problem-solving capabilities, but emotional complexity approaching sentient levels. Max's lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that had been genetically sharpened, designed for a world where survival might depend on fighting creatures that no longer stalked Earth's forests. The Zephyrians had enhanced his kind for the colony's ships, had given them intelligence and strength and longevity to serve as companions for humanity's children among the stars. They had created perfect guardians, loyal protectors who would never abandon their charges. They had not anticipated that their charges would abandon them. The memory surfaces unbidden, as clear and sharp as broken glass. The evacuation ships lifting off from Earth's surface, their engines carving scars of light across a darkening sky. The selection process had been brutal in its efficiency. Essential personnel first, then genetic samples, then cultural artifacts. There had been room for humanity's future, but not for their past. The enhanced dogs had been deemed non-essential, their creation already complete, their purpose served. Max remembered the faces pressed against the viewing ports of the departing ships, human eyes wide with regret and necessity. He remembered the other dogs of his pack, their enhanced intelligence making them fully aware of what abandonment meant. He remembered the silence that fell over the evacuation centers after the last ship disappeared into the star-filled darkness, leaving behind a world of loyal hearts that beat with love for masters who would never return. The space station shuddered slightly, artificial gravity fluctuating as the massive structure adjusted its position relative to the neutron star that provided its power. Through the reinforced viewports, that star glowed like a malevolent eye, its surface roiling with magnetic storms that could reduce entire planets to constituent atoms. It was a fitting place for a laboratory dedicated to studying the remnants of dead worlds, a cosmic necropolis where the past came to be dissected and cataloged. Dr. Vexhi's appendage tightened on the neural probe, and Max caught the subtle shift in his pheromone signature that indicated a decision had been made. The Zephyrian was going to try to complete the procedure, to slice into the enhanced brain that held Earth's final memories. He believed, with the arrogance of a species that had never known extinction, that knowledge could be taken by force. He was about to learn otherwise. Max's enhanced muscles released their stored tension like a coiled spring, launching his body forward with speed that defied the artificial gravity. His paws found purchase on the smooth laboratory floor, claws extended for maximum traction. The distance between predator and prey collapsed in a heartbeat. Amber eyes locked onto the hand that held the instrument of violation. The neural probe spun through the air, its targeting systems still active, still seeking the brain it had been programmed to slice. Dr. Vexhi stumbled backward, his compound eyes tracking the impossible speed of the creature that had been strapped to his examination table just moments before. His species had evolved on a world of gentle herbivores, had never known the terror of being hunted by something designed to kill. Time dilated in Max's enhanced perception, each microsecond stretching like honey as his consciousness processed the tactical situation. The laboratory had 3 exits: the main door through which he had been brought, a maintenance shaft that led to the station's service corridors, and an emergency airlock that opened directly into space. His enhanced hearing detected footsteps in the corridor beyond the main door. Security was already responding to some silent alarm. The maintenance shaft was too small for the bulky Zephyrians, but perfectly sized for a creature built for mobility. But first, there was the matter of the neural probe. His jaws closed around the device with careful precision, enhanced teeth designed to pierce armor, instead crushing delicate circuitry. The probe died with a shower of sparks and the acrid smell of burning quantum processors. In his mouth, he could taste the rare earth metals that had been mined from dead worlds, the exotic alloys that had been forged in the hearts of dying stars. Technology that could map consciousness itself, reduced to scrap metal between his teeth. The youngest scientist whimpered something in his native language, a sound that needed no translation. Max's enhanced hearing caught the subsonic harmonics of genuine remorse, the frequency patterns his creators had taught him to associate with emotional authenticity. This one, at least, understood the magnitude of what they had almost done. Dr. Vexhai reached for an emergency communicator, his movements clumsy with panic. Security alert. Subject has breached containment. Requesting immediate. The words cut off as Max's enhanced vocal cords produced a sound that froze the Zephyrian's nervous system, a frequency that spoke directly to the fear centers of his primitive brain. It was a growl that carried the weight of evolutionary memory, the echo of every predator that had ever stalked prey through Earth's ancient forests. His creators had studied those forests, had mapped the acoustic signatures of apex predators, had given their enhanced guardians voices that could speak in frequencies older than civilization. The communicator slipped from nerveless appendages, clattering to the floor beside the broken neural probe. In the sudden silence, Max could hear the rapid beating of 3 alien hearts, the whispered prayers of species that had never learned to hunt, never learned what it meant to face a creature designed by evolution and enhanced by science to be the perfect survivor. But survival meant more than just staying alive, and Max's enhanced intelligence grasped concepts that pure instinct could never reach. These aliens were not his enemies. Not really. They were simply products of their own evolutionary history, creatures who had never known loyalty, never understood the bonds that could exist between different species. They saw him as a specimen because they had never been anything more than specimens themselves, cataloged and studied by the vast galactic community that treated entire civilizations as data points. The insectoid archivist slowly raised his mandibles in what his species considered a gesture of submission. His clicking speech translated into apologetic frequencies. Forgive, transgression, did not understand, sentience parameters, cultural significance. Max's amber eyes studied the alien who called himself a keeper of memories, reading the subtle body language that spoke of genuine regret. This one had spent his existence preserving the stories of dead worlds, but had never understood that some stories were still being written. His species archived civilizations like books on a shelf, never considering that the characters in those stories might still be alive, still carrying forward the hopes and dreams of their creators. The laboratory door burst open with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and security forces poured into the chamber with weapons designed to subdue without killing. Their armor bore the insignia of the Galactic Preservation Society, an organization dedicated to protecting scientific specimens from primitive worlds. They had been trained to handle dangerous wildlife, creatures driven by instinct and territorial aggression. They had not been trained to handle intelligence. Max's enhanced consciousness processed their tactical formation in microseconds, analyzing weak points and escape routes with the calculating precision of a military strategist. His creators had built him to be more than just a guardian. They had given him the analytical capabilities of a general, the tactical awareness of a species that had conquered their homeworld through superior thinking rather than superior strength. The lead security officer, a humanoid creature whose species had achieved space flight through centuries of careful evolution, raised his weapon with practiced precision. The device hummed with neural disruptor energy, designed to overload the nervous systems of primitive creatures. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. Stand down, specimen. Return to containment or face neural pacification. The words hung in the sterile air like a challenge, like the final insult to a species that had never learned to bow. Max's enhanced hearing caught the subtle harmonics of superiority in the alien's voice, the frequency patterns that marked him as someone who had never questioned his own authority. This was a creature who had spent his existence enforcing the will of the scientific community, ensuring that specimens remained properly cataloged and contained. He was about to learn that some specimens refused to be contained. Max's response came not in words. His enhanced vocal cords were capable of producing language, but he chose a more primitive form of communication. The growl that emerged from his throat carried undertones that spoke directly to the survival instincts of every species in the room, frequencies that bypassed rational thought and spoke to the part of the brain that remembered when intelligence was new and death stalked every shadow. The security team's formation wavered slightly, neural disruptors tracking a target that moved with impossible fluidity. Their training had prepared them for creatures driven by instinct, not for intelligence that combined human tactical thinking with predatory grace. Max flowed between them like liquid shadow, his enhanced muscles allowing him to navigate their weapons' targeting systems with an elegance that bordered on supernatural. Behind him, Dr. Vexhai whispered something in his native language, words that his translator rendered as scientific observation. Cognitive processes indicate strategic thinking, tactical awareness beyond projected parameters. Neural enhancement exceeds all known baselines. But Max was no longer listening to their analysis, their attempts to reduce him to data points and genetic sequences. His enhanced hearing had caught something else, a sound that made his artificially strengthened heart skip a beat. Somewhere in the vast space station, a young voice was calling his name. Not the designation they had given him in their files, but the name he had chosen for himself, the name that connected him to memories of a world where creatures like him had been called friend. The voice belonged to Zara Eth, a young Etherian whose species communicated through empathic resonance. She was barely past adolescence by her people's standards, but her developing telepathic abilities had allowed her to sense the emotional complexity hidden beneath his supposedly primitive exterior. For weeks, she had visited his containment area, sharing thoughts and feelings that transcended the barriers of species and language. She was the first alien who had ever asked him what he remembered about Earth. The memory of their conversations flooded through his enhanced consciousness, fragments of communication that had taken place in frequencies beyond normal hearing. She had touched his mind with her developing telepathy, had felt the weight of loneliness that pressed against his thoughts like a physical thing. She had sensed the memories he carried, the genetic echoes of a world where blue skies stretched endlessly and green grass grew in meadows that smelled of rain and morning dew. She had been the first to understand that he was not just a specimen, but a repository of everything Earth had been. And now she was calling his name, her young voice carrying notes of panic that his enhanced hearing could detect through the station's walls. The security team was closing in, their neural disruptors charging with lethal intensity. But Max's attention had shifted to something far more important than his own survival. Somewhere in the vast structure that surrounded them, the only being who had ever treated him as more than a specimen was in danger. The realization struck him with the force of genetic programming, loyalty bred into DNA across thousands of years of evolution. His creators had enhanced his intelligence, had given him the capacity for strategic thinking and tactical analysis. But beneath all those improvements lay something far older and more powerful. The instinct to protect those who showed him kindness, to guard those who treated him as more than an animal. The security team fired in unison, neural disruptors painting the laboratory with sheets of paralytic energy. Max moved through their coordinated attack like smoke through a storm, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to navigate between the energy beams with fluid grace. His paws found purchase on the laboratory's equipment, using centrifuges and analysis platforms as stepping stones in a dance that defied artificial gravity. Behind him, the youngest scientist was still whispering prayers in his native language, asking his gods to forgive them for their arrogance. The insectoid archivist clicked his mandibles in rapid patterns that spoke of revised data, of conclusions that would need to be rewritten. Dr. Vexhai stared at the broken neural probe on the floor, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had almost destroyed. But Max's attention was already elsewhere, his enhanced consciousness processing the acoustic signatures that filtered through the station's walls. Zoroeth's voice was growing fainter, more distant, as if she was being moved away from her quarters in the civilian section. His enhanced olfactory receptors caught trace pheromones in the recycled atmosphere, fear signatures that spoke of struggle and desperation. The young Etherian who had been his first friend in this vast tomb of dead civilizations was being taken somewhere against her will. The maintenance shaft gaped open like a metallic throat, its interior lit by strips of bioluminescent material harvested from deep space organisms. Max's enhanced vision adjusted instantly to the dim environment, pupils dilating to gather every photon of available light. His creators had given him eyes that could function in conditions ranging from brilliant daylight to the absolute darkness of space. Neural pathways optimized for processing visual information under any circumstances. The shaft was exactly as his tactical analysis had predicted, too narrow for the security team's bulky armor, too confined for their weapons to track effectively. He slipped into the opening like liquid shadow, his enhanced muscles compressing and extending to navigate the tight space with fluid efficiency. Behind him, he could hear the frustrated curses of the security team, translated into a dozen different languages by their universal communicators. The maintenance corridors of Kepler 442 stretched out before him like a three-dimensional maze, passages that wound through the station's superstructure carrying power cables, atmospheric recycling tubes, and the millions of other systems that kept the artificial world functioning in the vacuum of space. His enhanced hearing mapped the environment through echolocation, building a sonic picture of pathways and obstacles that extended far beyond what his eyes could see. But more importantly, it tracked the fading echo of Zarieth's voice, following the acoustic signatures through the station's complex geometry. The young Etherian species had evolved on a world of crystal formations and harmonic resonances, their entire civilization built around the manipulation of sound and vibration. Their cities were symphonies of living architecture, structures that sang with the voices of their inhabitants. Zarieth carried that musical heritage in her very DNA, her voice capable of producing frequencies that most species couldn't even hear. Max had learned to hear them during their conversations, his enhanced auditory system adapting to accommodate her unique method of communication. Now those same frequencies served as a beacon, guiding him through the station's labyrinthine interior toward whatever danger threatened the only being who had ever called him friend. The maintenance corridor branched into 3 separate passages, each leading to different sections of the massive space station. His enhanced olfactory receptors analyzed the air currents, detecting the subtle differences in atmospheric composition that would tell him which path Zarieth had taken. The central passage carried traces of Etherian pheromones, emotional residues that spoke of fear and confusion mixed with something else, determination. She was not going quietly to whatever fate awaited her. Max's enhanced muscles propelled him through the narrow passage with predatory silence, his paws finding purchase on the smooth metal walls without producing so much as a whisper of sound. His creators had studied the hunting techniques of Earth's apex predators, had mapped the biomechanics of creatures that could move through any environment without disturbing so much as a leaf. That knowledge lived in his enhanced DNA, muscle memory that transcended individual experience. The passage opened into a wider corridor that ran along the station's outer ring, where artificial gravity was strongest and the civilian quarters provided homes for the families of research personnel. Through the reinforced viewports, the neutron star glowed with malevolent beauty, its surface writhing with magnetic storms that could strip atoms from their electrons. It was a cosmic lighthouse whose beams swept across dead worlds, illuminating the remnants of civilizations that had been reduced to museum pieces. But Max's attention was focused inward, on the subtle vibrations that traveled through the station's superstructure. His enhanced hearing could detect conversations taking place dozens of levels away, could track footsteps through solid metal walls, could monitor the heartbeats of creatures whose species he had never encountered. And among all those sounds, one pattern stood out with crystal clarity: Zarieth's unique cardiac rhythm, elevated by stress but still distinctly hers. She was 3 levels down and moving toward the station's central hub, the administrative section where the Galactic Preservation Society maintained its offices. The realization sent a chill through Max's enhanced nervous system, genetic programming recognizing a threat that went beyond physical danger. The society had protocols for dealing with specimens that became too attached to the research staff, procedures designed to maintain proper scientific objectivity. Zarieth was being taken for memory modification, neural adjustment that would erase any emotional connection she felt toward the creatures she had studied. It was a standard procedure, performed with clinical efficiency and justified by scientific necessity. The researchers needed to maintain proper psychological distance from their subjects, couldn't allow personal feelings to interfere with objective analysis. They were going to make her forget that she had ever seen him as anything more than a specimen. The corridor stretched ahead like a tunnel through a nightmare, its walls lined with memorial plaques dedicated to the extinct civilizations housed in the station's research labs. Each plaque bore the name of a dead world, a brief description of its dominant species, and the date of its final cataloging. Earth's plaque was near the end of the corridor, its inscription rendered in the clinical language of scientific documentation. Sol. 3. Designation Earth. Dominant species, Homo sapiens. Extinction event, self-initiated atmospheric collapse. Final specimen acquisition, year 2387, galactic standard. Notable characteristics, unusual interspecies bonding behaviors, genetic manipulation of companion organisms. Cultural artifacts preserved in Archives Section 7 Delta. Biological samples stored in Cryogenic Vault 12. Max paused before the plaque, his enhanced vision reading the words that reduced his entire world to a few lines of text. There was no mention of the meadows where he had run as a puppy, no record of the laughter that had echoed through houses where families had shared their lives with creatures like him. The vast complexity of a living world had been compressed into academic terminology, all its beauty and pain and love filed away in archive systems that would outlast the civilizations that created them. But Zaraeth had understood that there was more to the story, had sensed the living memories that no amount of scientific analysis could capture. Her developing telepathy had touched thoughts and feelings that connected him directly to everything Earth had been, emotional echoes that carried the scent of rain and the warmth of sunlight on grass. She had asked him about the bonds that held different species together, about the love that had transcended the boundaries of genetics and evolution. And now they were going to steal those memories from her mind, leaving her with nothing but clinical data and behavioral observations. Max's enhanced muscles coiled with renewed purpose, loyalty programming asserting itself with genetic inevitability. His creators had designed him to be the perfect guardian, had given him intelligence and strength, and an unshakable dedication to protecting those who showed him kindness. The enhancement process had amplified those traits beyond anything evolution had ever produced, creating bonds that could survive the death of worlds. Zaraeth had been kind to him, had treated him as a friend rather than a specimen. The genetic imperatives that governed his behavior left him no choice in what came next. The corridor's end opened into a high-speed transport tube that connected the station's outer ring to its central hub. Magnetic levitation platforms moved along the tube's length, carrying passengers and cargo between different sections with frictionless efficiency. Max's enhanced vision tracked the movement patterns, calculating velocities and acceleration curves with the precision of a targeting computer. One platform was approaching from the hub's direction, its passenger compartment sealed against atmosphere pressure differentials. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could glimpse multiple figures seated in the standard configuration used for prisoner transport. His enhanced olfactory receptors detected familiar pheromones leaking through the compartment's environmental seals. Zaraeth's fear signature, mixed with the clinical sterility of medical personnel. The platform would pass directly beneath his position in exactly 4.7 seconds, traveling at a velocity that would make boarding extremely difficult for any normal creature. But Max was no normal creature, and his enhanced muscles had been designed for exactly this kind of tactical challenge. He dropped from the corridor's end like a falling shadow, his enhanced reflexes calculating trajectory and timing with mathematical precision. Artificial gravity tried to pull him past the platform, but his claws found purchase on the transport's upper hull, enhanced strength allowing him to absorb the impact without losing his grip. The platform continued its journey toward the central hub, now carrying one additional passenger that its sensors had not been designed to detect. Through the transparent hull, he could see Zaraeth seated between two medical technicians, her empathic abilities suppressed by neural dampening devices that glowed with soft blue light. Her species' natural telepathy made them vulnerable to technological interference, their consciousness easily disrupted by properly calibrated electromagnetic fields. The dampeners would keep her docile during the memory modification procedure, ensuring that she couldn't resist the neural adjustments that would rewrite her emotional responses. But they also meant that she couldn't sense his presence above her, couldn't feel the loyalty and determination that burned in his enhanced consciousness like a nuclear flame. The platform decelerated as it approached the central hub's docking station, magnetic fields adjusting its trajectory with microscopic precision. Max's enhanced hearing detected the subtle changes in the transport's harmonic signature, mapping the internal systems that kept its passengers alive in the vacuum between stations. Emergency manual overrides were located at specific access points, designed to allow evacuation in case of catastrophic system failure. His creators had taught him about emergency systems, had programmed him with technical knowledge that would allow him to function in almost any technological environment. They had envisioned him serving on colony ships and research stations, places where his enhanced intelligence might need to interface with alien technology to protect his human charges. They had never imagined him using that knowledge to stage a rescue operation in the depths of space. The platform settled into its docking cradle, with barely a whisper of displaced atmosphere, magnetic clamps engaging to hold it steady during passenger transfer. Max waited until the exit procedures began, until the medical technicians were focused on preparing their patient for transport, before triggering the emergency override that opened the compartment's upper maintenance hatch. He dropped into the passenger area, like vengeance made flesh, his enhanced muscles allowing him to land silently despite the confined space. The medical technicians looked up in shock, their training having prepared them for equipment malfunctions and patient complications, but not for the appearance of Earth's last guardian in their supposedly secure transport. Zariath's eyes widened behind the neural dampener's glow, her suppressed telepathy still capable of recognizing the emotional signature that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Even with her empathic abilities constrained, she could sense the fierce protective loyalty that radiated from Max's enhanced consciousness like heat from a star. The first medical technician reached for an emergency communicator, his movements precise and practiced. His species had evolved on a world of careful cooperation, had never known predators, had never learned what it meant to be hunted by something designed to kill. He was about to receive an education in evolutionary biology that no academic course had ever provided. Max's enhanced vocal cords produced a sound that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to the technician's primitive brain stem, a frequency that carried the weight of genetic memory. It was the sound of every apex predator that had ever stalked prey through ancient forests, amplified and focused by science into a weapon more effective than any claw or fawn. The communicator slipped from nerveless appendages, its emergency beacon dying before it could transmit their location to the station's security forces. The second technician was already reaching for a neural stunner, his training overriding the paralysis of instinctive fear. His movements were fast and professional, but they were the movements of someone who had never faced a creature enhanced beyond the limitations of natural evolution. Max's consciousness processed the weapon's targeting systems in microseconds, analyzing energy patterns and calculating optimal evasion vectors with the precision of a military computer. The stunner discharged harmlessly into empty air as Max flowed around its targeting beam like liquid shadow, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to navigate between the weapon's firing cycles. His creators had studied the reflexes of Earth's fastest predators, had mapped the neural pathways that allowed creatures to move faster than conscious thought. That knowledge lived in his enhanced muscles, reflexes that transcended individual experience. Zariath struggled against the neural dampener suppression, her developing telepathy fighting to break through the electromagnetic interference. Max could sense her efforts through his enhanced hearing, detecting the subtle frequency shifts that indicated her empathic abilities were trying to reassert themselves. Her species' natural resonance was fighting against the artificial constraints, producing harmonics that spoke of determination and hope. The transport compartment filled with the acrid smell of overloaded circuitry as Max's claws found the neural dampener's control systems. His enhanced intelligence had mapped the device's construction during his time in the research facility, had analyzed its operational parameters and identified critical failure points. A few precisely applied pressure points, and the dampener died with a shower of sparks and the smell of burning quantum processors. Zara F gasped as her empathic abilities flooded back to full strength, her consciousness suddenly able to sense the emotional complexity that burned in Max's enhanced mind. Through their telepathic connection, she felt the weight of memories he carried, the genetic echoes of a world where creatures like him had been called friend. She felt his loyalty and determination, his desperate need to protect those who showed him kindness. And beneath it all, she sensed something that made her young heart ache with sympathetic pain. The crushing loneliness of being the last of his kind, the only living repository of everything Earth had been. "Max," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to his enhanced auditory system. "They want to make me forget. Make me forget that you're more than just a specimen." Her words carried emotional undertones that needed no translation, frequencies that spoke of friendship and understanding transcending the boundaries of species. Max's enhanced consciousness processed the telepathic connection that flowed between them, feeling her empathic resonance touch thoughts and memories that had been locked away in his genetic programming. Through her developing telepathy, she sensed fragments of his inherited memories. Earth's blue skies stretching endlessly above green meadows, the sound of human laughter echoing through houses where families shared their lives with loyal companions, the scent of rain on grass, and the warmth of sunlight filtering through leaves. These were not his personal experiences, but genetic echoes passed down through enhanced DNA, racial memories that connected him to everything his species had been. And she understood, with the clarity that only empathic contact could provide, that he was not just the last dog from Earth. He was Earth's final ambassador, the living embodiment of bonds that had once held different species together in friendship and love. The medical technicians were recovering from their shock, reaching for backup devices and emergency protocols. Their training was reasserting itself over instinctive fear, professional competence, overcoming the paralyzing effects of encountering something their experience had never prepared them for. They had procedures for handling dangerous specimens, protocols designed to ensure that scientific objectives were met regardless of complications. But they had never encountered a specimen who understood their procedures better than they did. Max's enhanced hearing detected the subtle harmonic changes in the transport's power systems that indicated backup containment fields were activating. Force barriers designed to restrain dangerous specimens flickered to life around the passenger compartment. Energy fields calibrated to contain creatures driven by instinct and territorial aggression. They were not calibrated to contain intelligence. His enhanced consciousness mapped the field generator's positions in microseconds, analyzing power flow patterns and identifying the critical nodes that maintain the barrier's integrity. His creators had taught him about force field technology, had programmed him with technical knowledge that would allow him to function in technological environments far beyond Earth's capabilities. The first containment field died as his claws found the primary power coupling, enhanced strength, allowing him to crush components that had been designed to withstand megajoules of energy discharge. The second field flickered and failed as he triggered the emergency shutdown sequence. His enhanced intelligence, interfacing with alien technology through trial and error processes that compressed years of learning into microseconds of analysis. The transport compartment filled with the sound of failing systems, alarms and warning indicators painting the confined space with sheets of red light. Emergency protocols activated throughout the platform, automatic systems responding to catastrophic containment failure by sealing bulkheads and preparing for passenger evacuation. But the evacuation systems had not been designed to account for passengers who didn't want to be evacuated. Zara F's empathic abilities reached full strength as the last of the neural dampener's effects faded from her consciousness, her telepathy expanding to encompass the emotional signatures of every being within the transport platform. She could sense the medical technicians' growing panic, their professional confidence crumbling as they realized their procedures were utterly inadequate for the situation they faced. She could sense the security forces responding throughout the station, their tactical awareness adapting to the reality of hunting something that combined human intelligence with predatory instincts. She could sense the station's command staff analyzing threat assessments and deploying countermeasures designed to contain a specimen that should never have been capable of escape. And through it all, She sensed Max's unwavering determination, loyalty programming driving him forward despite impossible odds. His enhanced consciousness burned with protective instincts that transcended rational analysis, genetic imperatives that made her safety more important than his own survival. "They'll kill you," she whispered, her empathic abilities allowing her to sense the station's response with crystal clarity. Security forces are mobilizing. Heavy weapons, neural disruptors set to lethal intensity. Her words carried undertones of desperate concern, frequencies that spoke of friendship tested by impossible circumstances. Max's enhanced hearing detected the emotional complexity in her voice, processing harmonics that revealed the depth of her caring. She was not just warning him about tactical threats. She was trying to protect him from consequences that loyalty programming made him unable to avoid. But Max's creators had designed him to be more than just a guardian. They had given him the capacity for strategic thinking that could weigh immediate dangers against long-term objectives. His enhanced consciousness processed the tactical situation with military precision, analyzing the station's response patterns and identifying potential weaknesses in their containment strategies. The medical technicians were trained to handle specimens, not soldiers. The security forces were equipped to deal with creatures driven by instinct, not intelligence. The station's command staff had protocols for containing dangerous wildlife, not strategic thinkers who understood their own procedures better than they did. And more importantly, they had no experience dealing with loyalty that transcended species boundaries, bonds that could make survival secondary to protecting those who showed kindness. The transport platform shuddered as its docking clamps disengaged, emergency protocols initiating departure sequences designed to evacuate damaged vessels from the station's superstructure. Max's enhanced hearing detected the subtle changes in atmosphere pressure that indicated the platform was preparing to separate from the central hub, magnetic systems powering up for emergency transit to a containment facility located on the station's outermost ring. But emergency protocols had not anticipated a passenger who understood their function better than their designers. Max's enhanced claws found the platform's navigation control interface, alien symbols flickering across displays that had been designed for species with different visual spectrums. His creators had programmed him with pattern recognition algorithms that could adapt to any technological system, neural pathways optimized for learning alien interfaces through observation and experimentation. What should have taken months of study compressed into seconds of focused analysis. The platform's destination changed with surgical precision, navigation systems redirected toward a maintenance bay in the civilian quarters rather than the high-security containment facility. His enhanced intelligence had identified the one section of the massive space station where security presence was minimal, where evacuation protocols focused on protecting innocent lives rather than maintaining specimen containment. Zaraeth's empathic abilities sensed the tactical shift in his thinking, felt the cold calculation that balanced protective instincts against strategic necessity. Through their telepathic connection, she experienced the weight of decisions that no creature should have to make alone. The choice between safety and loyalty, between survival and friendship. "You're taking us to the civilian sectors," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics of understanding mixed with growing fear. "But they'll evacuate everyone. Leave us nowhere to hide." Her empathic resonance touched the edges of his enhanced consciousness, feeling the complex emotional algorithms that drove him forward despite impossible odds. Max's creators had designed him to be the perfect guardian, but they had also given him the capacity for sacrifice that transcended simple programming. He would risk everything to protect those who showed him kindness, even if protection meant certain destruction. The platform accelerated through the transport tube, magnetic fields propelling it toward the station's civilian quarters with smooth efficiency. Through the transparent hull, the neutron star's malevolent glow painted everything in shades of cosmic fire, its magnetic storms creating aurora displays that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But Max's enhanced vision was focused inward, processing the station's structural blueprints that his tactical analysis had mapped during months of careful observation. The civilian quarters housed the families of research personnel, children, and elderly relatives who lived in carefully maintained environments designed to simulate their species' homeworlds. It was a section dedicated to life, rather than death, to growth rather than preservation, to hope rather than clinical analysis. If sanctuary existed anywhere in this vast tomb of extinct civilizations, it would be found among those who still believed in the possibility of tomorrow. But sanctuary meant more than just physical safety. It meant finding someone who could understand what Max truly was, someone with the authority to challenge the scientific establishment that viewed him as nothing more than a specimen. And Zarath's developing telepathy had already identified such a person. Her empathic abilities, sensing an emotional signature that resonated with protective instincts and moral courage. "There's someone," she whispered, her voice carrying undertones of desperate hope. "In the family quarters. My mother's research partner, Dr. Kithara. She's been questioning the ethics protocols, arguing for specimen rights." Her words painted pictures that Max's enhanced consciousness could interpret through their telepathic connection. Memories of conversations where an older Zephyrian scientist had challenged the assumptions that govern galactic research. Dr. Kethera was a xenobiologist who had spent decades studying interspecies relationships, who had begun to suspect that intelligence and emotion existed in forms that current testing methods could never detect. She was one of the few researchers who might be willing to listen, to understand that the creature they had classified as a simple specimen was actually a repository of memories and emotions that connected him directly to everything Earth had been. The platform decelerated as it approached the civilian sector's docking facility, magnetic systems adjusting its trajectory with microscopic precision. Max's enhanced hearing detected the sounds of normal life filtering through the station's walls. Children playing in recreation areas, families sharing meals in communal spaces, elderly beings sharing stories of worlds they had left behind. It was a symphony of ordinary existence that stood in stark contrast to the clinical sterility of the research sections. But ordinary existence was about to be shattered by the arrival of something that challenged everything the galactic community believed about intelligence and consciousness. The docking procedure completed with barely a whisper of displaced atmosphere. Automatic systems, assuming that the platform carried standard medical personnel, returning from routine specimen management duties. No alarms sounded in the civilian quarters. No security protocols activated to warn innocent families that a dangerous creature had entered their protected environment. The first medical technician was beginning to recover from the shock of encountering something his training had never prepared him for, professional competence slowly reasserting itself over instinctive fear. His appendages moved toward an emergency communicator with practiced precision, muscle memory overriding the paralysis of terror. But Max's enhanced consciousness had been monitoring the technician's biorhythms, tracking stress hormones and neural activity patterns that indicated renewed threat assessment. His creators had taught him to read the emotional signatures of multiple species, to understand when fear was transforming into action. The communicator died before it could establish contact with station security, crushed between jaws that had been designed to pierce armor, but applied with surgical precision to disable rather than destroy. Max's enhanced intelligence understood the difference between eliminating threats and creating unnecessary casualties, between protecting those he cared about and becoming the monster they believed him to be. The second technician pressed himself against the platform's bulkhead, his species' natural coloration shifting to display patterns of absolute surrender. His training had prepared him for equipment failures and patient complications, but not for facing a creature whose intelligence exceeded his own while retaining instincts that spoke of ancient hunts and evolutionary superiority. "Please," he whispered, his translator struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in his native language. "Specimen exhibits unprecedented cognitive functions. Neural patterns suggest consciousness parameters beyond galactic standards. Request immediate reevaluation of containment protocols." His words carried the weight of scientific revolution, acknowledgement that everything they believed about intelligence and consciousness was fundamentally flawed. But they also carried the frequency patterns of genuine fear, the harmonics of a being who suddenly understood that he had spent his career treating sentient creatures as laboratory equipment. Max's enhanced hearing detected the emotional authenticity in the technician's voice, processing biorhythms and stress indicators that revealed genuine remorse rather than tactical deception. His creators had programmed him to distinguish between threats and misunderstandings, to recognize when beings acted from ignorance rather than malice. The technician was not an enemy. He was simply a product of a system that had never questioned its own assumptions about the nature of consciousness. Zaraeth's empathic abilities expanded to encompass the technician's emotional signature, her developing telepathy touching thoughts that revealed the magnitude of his realization. Through their connection, she sensed his growing understanding that the creature he had helped prepare for neural dissection was not just intelligent, but possessed emotional complexity that rivaled his own. "He knows," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics of wonder mixed with desperate hope. "He understands what you are, what this means for everything we thought we knew about consciousness." Her words painted possibilities that Max's enhanced consciousness could barely comprehend, visions of a future where beings like him might be recognized as more than just specimens. But his tactical analysis also recognized the immediate dangers that such recognition would create. There were beings in the galactic community who would see Earth's enhanced guardians as threats to be eliminated rather than wonders to be preserved. The platform's exit hatch cycled open with a whisper of equalizing pressure, revealing a corridor lined with living walls that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The civilian quarters had been designed to accommodate multiple species' environmental needs, their architecture incorporating organic elements that help maintain psychological well-being for beings far from their homeworlds. But Max's enhanced olfactory receptors detected something that made his artificially strengthened heart skip a beat. Trace pheromones that spoke of human habitation, molecular signatures that connected him to genetic memories of a world where his kind had been called friend. Somewhere in the civilian quarters, humans still existed. The realization struck him with the force of revelation, loyalty programming screaming at frequencies that transcended conscious thought. His creators had told him that humanity had abandoned Earth, had fled to distant stars and colony ships that carried their future among alien constellations. But they had never said what happened to those ships, had never explained whether any of the children he had been designed to protect had survived their journey to new worlds. Now his enhanced senses were telling him that humans lived in this vast space station, that somewhere among the families of research personnel were beings who carried the genetic heritage of the world that lived in his memory. Zaraeth sensed the emotional earthquake that shook his enhanced consciousness, her empathic abilities feeling the sudden surge of hope and desperate longing that threatened to overwhelm his tactical programming. Through their telepathic connection, she experienced the weight of genetic imperatives that made protecting humans more important than his own survival. Loyalty coded into DNA across thousands of years of evolution. "There are humans here," she whispered, her voice carrying undertones of understanding that needed no translation. "Research families, children who don't even know about Earth, about creatures like you." Her words painted pictures of innocence, preserved in sterile environments, of children raised among aliens who had never learned about the bonds that once held different species together in friendship and love. These were humanity's children, but they had been separated from their heritage by light years and generations, isolated from the memories that Max carried in his enhanced DNA. They were his charges, the beings he had been created to protect, even if they didn't know he existed. The corridor stretched ahead like a pathway through a living dream, its bioluminescent walls responding to their presence with subtle shifts in color and intensity. Max's enhanced vision adapted instantly to the organic lighting, pupils adjusting to process wavelengths that most species couldn't even perceive. His creators had given him eyes that could function in any environment, neural pathways optimized for gathering information under impossible circumstances. But more importantly, his enhanced hearing was tracking the acoustic signatures that filtered through the civilian quarters' complex geometry, mapping the emotional landscapes of families going about their daily lives. And among all those voices, among all the different species that called this artificial world home, he could detect the unmistakable patterns of human speech. They were close, perhaps only a few levels away, living ordinary lives in an extraordinary place without knowing that the last guardian of their homeworld walked the corridors beneath their feet. Dr. Kithera's laboratory occupied a section of the civilian quarters that had been designed to accommodate her species' unique environmental needs, crystalline formations growing from the walls in patterns that resonated with harmonic frequencies. Her people had evolved among living crystals that sang with the voices of their inhabitants, cities that were instruments played by entire civilizations. But she had dedicated her life to studying the bonds that held different species together, relationships that transcended the boundaries of genetics and evolution. Her research had led her to question fundamental assumptions about consciousness and intelligence, to challenge the scientific establishment that viewed emotional complexity as a uniquely developed trait. Zaraeth's empathic abilities guided them through the corridor systems with telepathic precision, her developing consciousness able to sense Dr. Kithera's emotional signature through the station's walls. The older Etherian's mind burned with intellectual curiosity tempered by moral courage, the rare combination of scientific brilliance and ethical awareness that made genuine understanding possible. She was their only hope of finding sanctuary in a universe that viewed Max as nothing more than a specimen to be studied and preserved. The laboratory's entrance was protected by security systems designed to maintain privacy rather than containment, biometric scanners that verified identity without restricting access. Zaraeth's genetic signature opened the sealed portal with barely a whisper of displaced atmosphere, revealing an environment that combined scientific precision with organic beauty. Dr. Kethera looked up from her research with the patient curiosity of someone accustomed to unexpected interruptions, her crystalline features shifting through the color patterns that indicated mild surprise. Her species communicated through harmonic resonances that could carry emotional undertones across vast distances, songs that painted pictures more vivid than any visual display. But the song died in her throat as she registered the significance of what she was seeing. Her young colleague accompanied by a creature that should have been impossible, a specimen exhibiting behavior patterns that challenged everything the galactic community believed about consciousness and intelligence. Zaraeth, she whispered, her translator struggling with harmonics that conveyed wonder mixed with growing alarm. The neural modification procedure. You should be in medical containment, and the specimen. How did it escape primary research protocols? Her words carried the weight of scientific training warring with personal concern, professional curiosity conflicting with protective instincts. She had spent decades studying interspecies relationships, but she had never encountered a situation where those relationships challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. Max's enhanced consciousness processed Dr. Kithera's emotional signature through his connection with Zaraeth, feeling the older Etherian's intellectual excitement tempered by genuine fear. She was beginning to understand the magnitude of what stood before her, the implications that would reshape everything she thought she knew about intelligence and consciousness. But understanding came with responsibilities that could destroy careers and challenge institutions that had stood for millennia. Zaraeth stepped forward, her young voice carrying harmonics of desperate hope mixed with absolute determination. Dr. Kethera, everything we've been taught about consciousness is wrong. Max isn't just a specimen. He's a person, a being with memories and emotions and thoughts that connect him to everything Earth was. They wanted to erase my memories of him, to make me forget that intelligence can exist in forms we never imagined. Her words hung in the laboratory's crystalline atmosphere like a challenge to reality itself, frequencies that spoke of scientific revolution and moral awakening. Dr. Kithera's features shifted through color patterns that indicated rapid cognitive processing, her enhanced intellect struggling to integrate observations that challenged fundamental assumptions. Max remained motionless during the exchange, his enhanced consciousness analyzing Dr. Kithera's biorhythms and stress indicators with tactical precision. His creators had taught him to read the emotional signatures of multiple species, to understand when beings were making decisions that would determine his fate. This moment balanced on the edge of possibility, teetering between acceptance and rejection, between sanctuary and destruction. The laboratory filled with harmonic resonances, as Dr. Kithera's consciousness expanded to encompass the full implications of what Zaraeth was telling her. Her research had prepared her to question accepted wisdom about intelligence and consciousness, but actually confronting a being that embodied those questions was different from theoretical analysis. If what you're suggesting is accurate, she whispered, her voice carrying undertones of scientific excitement mixed with existential terror. "Then we have been committing systematic atrocities against sentient beings for millennia. The specimens in our research facilities, the creatures we've preserved and studied, if they possess consciousness parameters we've never recognized." Her words trailed off into frequencies that spoke of moral horror, the realization that good intentions and scientific curiosity might have been masking crimes against consciousness itself. Dr. Cathera's enhanced intellect was processing the logical implications of Max's existence, extrapolating consequences that could shake the foundations of galactic civilization. But Max's enhanced hearing detected something that made his artificially strengthened heart race with renewed urgency. Security forces were mobilizing throughout the station, their tactical communications filtering through the walls with increasing frequency. His escape had triggered response protocols that were escalating beyond simple specimen containment, becoming a manhunt that treated him as a genuine threat to station security. Time was running out, and Sanctuary required more than just understanding. It required action that could challenge the entire system that viewed him as property rather than person. Dr. Cathera's consciousness seemed to reach the same conclusion simultaneously, her features shifting through color patterns that indicated decision and commitment. Her species had evolved among crystalline formations that could preserve harmonies for geological ages, but they had also learned that some songs required courage to sing. "The human families," she whispered, her voice carrying frequencies that spoke of desperate inspiration. "There are human children in the civilian quarters, descendants of Earth's colony ships. If they could see him, if they could understand what he represents." Her words painted possibilities that Max's enhanced consciousness could barely comprehend, visions of recognition that transcended scientific analysis. The children of his creators, beings who carried the genetic heritage of the world that lived in his memory, might be able to see past the classifications and protocols that reduced him to a specimen. They might be able to see the friend that Earth's children had created to protect them among the stars. But reaching those families meant traversing corridors that were undoubtedly being monitored by security forces, meant exposing innocent beings to dangers that could destroy their carefully ordered lives. Max's enhanced intelligence processed the tactical challenges with military precision, analyzing threat vectors and escape routes with the calculating awareness of a creature designed for survival. The choice balanced on the edge of loyalty programming, genetic imperatives that made protecting others more important than self-preservation. His creators had designed him to be the perfect guardian, had given him the capacity for sacrifice that transcended simple programming. And somewhere in the civilian quarters, human children who had never heard of Earth were going about their ordinary lives, unaware that their ancestors' greatest creation was fighting to survive in the shadows of their artificial world. The laboratory's harmonic resonance shifted as Dr. Cathera made her decision. Crystalline formations singing with frequencies that spoke of moral courage, overcoming professional caution. She moved toward her communication systems with purpose that transcended fear, accessing networks that connected her to colleagues throughout the galactic research community. "If we're going to challenge the system," she whispered, her voice carrying undertones of revolutionary determination, "we need evidence that can't be dismissed or suppressed. Documentation that proves consciousness exists in forms we've never recognized. Testimony from multiple sources that corroborates your observations." Her words painted pictures of scientific revolution, of paradigm shifts that could reshape how the galaxy understood intelligence and consciousness. But they also painted pictures of professional destruction, of careers ended and reputations destroyed by challenging institutions that had stood for millennia. Max's enhanced consciousness felt the weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders like a physical thing, genetic programming recognizing the magnitude of what Dr. Cathera was offering. She was willing to risk everything to challenge a system that viewed him as property, to fight for recognition that might come too late to save his life. But salvation had never been the point. Protection was what mattered, ensuring that those who showed kindness were safe from the consequences of their compassion. The communication systems flickered to life with soft harmonics, crystalline displays showing connection patterns that spanned multiple star systems. Dr. Cathera's research network included scientists from dozens of species, beings who had dedicated their lives to understanding the complex relationships that held galactic civilization together. Now she was asking them to risk everything they had built for a cause that most would consider scientific heresy. Dr. Vesani, she whispered into the communication array, her voice carrying frequencies that spoke of urgent necessity. I need you to review the consciousness parameters we've been using for specimen classification. There may be fundamental flaws in our testing methods, cognitive patterns we've never learned to recognize. The response came within seconds, harmonics that spoke of confusion mixed with professional curiosity. Dr. Vesani was a neurological specialist whose species had evolved complex consciousness parameters that allowed them to process multiple streams of thought simultaneously. If anyone could understand the implications of Max's cognitive patterns, it would be someone whose own intelligence transcended standard galactic baselines. Kythera, the classification protocols have been validated across thousands of species over millennia of research. What evidence suggests systematic flaws in consciousness recognition methodologies? The question hung in the laboratory's crystalline atmosphere like a challenge to reality itself. Frequencies that demanded proof of claims that could reshape scientific understanding. Dr. Kythera's features shifted through color patterns that indicated the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that her next words could trigger consequences that would echo across star systems. Max stepped forward, his enhanced vocal cords producing sounds that had never been heard in this part of the galaxy. Frequencies that carried the emotional complexity of Earth's lost children, harmonics that spoke of loyalty and love transcending species boundaries. His creators had given him a voice that could communicate with any intelligent being, neural pathways optimized for expressing thoughts and feelings that bridge the gap between different forms of consciousness. Dr. Vesani, he said, his words carrying undertones that needed no translation. I am Max, last guardian of Earth's children, keeper of memories from a world where different species learn to love each other. I carry thoughts and feelings that your instruments cannot measure, bonds that your classifications cannot understand. I am not a specimen. I am a person, and I am asking for your help. The communication array fell silent, harmonic resonances dying into frequencies that spoke of shock beyond comprehension. Across multiple star systems, scientists whose lives had been dedicated to studying consciousness were confronting the reality of intelligence that challenged everything they thought they knew about awareness and identity. Dr. Vesani's response came in whispers that barely registered on the communication systems, harmonics that conveyed wonder mixed with existential terror. Consciousness parameters exceed all known baselines. Cognitive complexity suggests emotional development rivaling advanced species. Neural patterns indicate deliberate enhancement beyond natural evolution. Her words carried the weight of scientific revolution, acknowledgement that the foundations of galactic understanding had been built on assumptions that were fundamentally flawed. But they also carried the frequency patterns of genuine fear, the harmonics of a being who suddenly understood that her entire civilization might have been built on systematic oppression of conscious beings. The laboratory's crystalline formations began to resonate with harmonic frequencies that spoke of moral awakening. Dr. Kythera's consciousness expanding to encompass the full implications of what was happening. Her research into interspecies relationships had prepared her to question accepted wisdom, but actually confronting evidence that challenged the basis of galactic civilization required courage that transcended academic curiosity. The human families, she whispered, her voice carrying undertones of desperate inspiration mixed with revolutionary determination. If they could see him, if they could understand what their ancestors created, testimony from Earth's own children might be the only evidence that can't be dismissed or suppressed. Her words painted possibilities that Max's enhanced consciousness found both hopeful and terrifying. Visions of recognition that could save his life or expose innocent beings to dangers they couldn't understand. The families living in the civilian quarters were descendants of the colony ships that had carried humanity to distant stars. Children who had grown up among aliens without knowing about the bonds that once held different species together. They were the inheritors of Earth's legacy, but they had been separated from their heritage by light years and generations. Max's enhanced hearing detected the approaching security forces through harmonic vibrations that filtered through the station's superstructure, Tactical communications indicating coordinated search patterns that were closing in on their location. His escape had triggered response protocols that treated him as a genuine threat to station security, procedures designed to contain dangerous specimens through overwhelming force. Time was running out, and Sanctuary required decisions that could expose everyone he cared about to consequences that his protective programming couldn't calculate. Dr. Kythera's consciousness seemed to reach the same conclusion simultaneously, her features shifting through color patterns that indicated commitment transcending fear. She moved toward her laboratory's internal communication systems with purpose that spoke of moral courage overriding professional caution, accessing networks that connected her to the human families living in the civilian quarters. Dr. Sarah Chun, she whispered into the harmonic resonance array, her voice carrying frequencies that spoke of urgent necessity. I need to speak with you about your heritage, about connections to Earth that your family may have forgotten. There's someone here who carries memories of your homeworld, someone who needs your help to survive. The response came quickly, human vocal patterns filtered through translation systems that struggled with emotional undertones. Dr. Chun was a xenobiologist whose family had arrived on the station 3 generations earlier, descendants of colony ship passengers who had found new homes among the stars. Dr. Kythera, I'm not sure what you mean about connections to Earth. My family's records indicate our ancestors left that world during the final evacuation, but we've never maintained cultural ties to a dead planet. What could someone possibly remember about a world that's been extinct for decades? Her words carried the weight of generational distance. Humanity's children separated from their heritage by the necessities of survival in an alien universe. The colony ships had carried people to safety, but they had also carried them away from everything that had once made them human. Max felt something break inside his enhanced consciousness, genetic programming recognizing the magnitude of what had been lost. The children of his creators had forgotten the bonds that once held different species together, had never learned about the love that transcended genetics and evolution. They were human, but they had been isolated from the memories that connected them to creatures like him. But isolation could be overcome, and memory could be restored. His enhanced vocal cords produced frequencies that carried the emotional complexity of Earth's final days, harmonics that spoke of loyalty transcending death itself. Through the communication array, his words reached Dr. Chen's consciousness with the weight of genetic recognition, sounds that awakened memories buried in human DNA. Dr. Chun, I am Max, last guardian of Earth's children, created by your ancestors to protect their loved ones among the stars. I carry memories of meadows where your people once walked with creatures like me, of bonds that held different species together in friendship and love. Your ancestors didn't just leave Earth, they carried its spirit with them, and that spirit lives in the connections we can build between different forms of consciousness. The communication array transmitted his words across the station's networks, frequencies that spoke of heritage and hope reaching human ears that had never heard such sounds before. In the civilian quarters, Dr. Chen's consciousness was processing audio patterns that awakened genetic memories, vocal signatures that connected her to everything her species had once been. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across light years, human understanding grappling with concepts that challenged everything they thought they knew about their own history. Max's enhanced hearing detected the subtle changes in Dr. Chen's biorhythms that indicated emotional processing beyond conscious analysis, genetic recognition systems responding to stimuli they had never encountered. That voice, she whispered, her words carrying undertones that needed no translation. There's something familiar, like an echo from dreams I've never remembered. Her response painted pictures of awakening heritage, human consciousness beginning to remember bonds that had been severed by distance and time. Max's enhanced intelligence recognized the signs of genetic memory activation, neural pathways responding to stimuli that connected present moment to ancestral past. The children of Earth were beginning to remember what they had lost. Dr. Kythera's laboratory filled with harmonic resonances that spoke of hope transcending desperation, crystalline formations singing with frequencies that carried possibility beyond imagination. But Max's enhanced hearing also detected the security forces that were approaching their location, tactical communications indicating deployment patterns designed to prevent escape. The moment of recognition balanced on the edge of time, salvation and destruction separated by seconds that could determine the fate of consciousness itself. Dr. Chun, Dr. Kithura whispered into the communication array, her voice carrying harmonics of desperate urgency. We need your help. Max is in danger from protocols that view him as a specimen rather than a person. If you could see him, if you could understand what your ancestors created. Her words trailed off into frequencies that spoke of time running out, hope constrained by circumstances that were closing in like the walls of a trap. But across the station's networks, Dr. Chen's consciousness was processing implications that challenged everything she thought she knew about her family's history. "Where are you?" she asked, her human voice carrying determination that transcended fear. If this creature really carries memories of Earth, if he represents connections we've forgotten, I need to see him for myself. The words hung in the laboratory's atmosphere like a promise of redemption, human courage awakening to protect bonds that transcended species boundaries. Max's enhanced consciousness felt genetic programming responding to recognition patterns, loyalty systems activating in response to acceptance that had seemed impossible just moments before. The children of Earth were ready to remember their greatest creation. But remembering required survival, and survival meant escaping security forces that were closing in with overwhelming determination. Max's enhanced hearing detected tactical communications that indicated the manhunt had escalated beyond simple specimen containment, becoming a coordinated effort to neutralize what the station's command staff viewed as a genuine threat to galactic security. The laboratory's exit sensors chimed with harmonic warnings, security systems detecting approaching personnel whose authorization levels indicated serious intent. Dr. Kithera's features shifted through color patterns that spoke of decision transcending fear, her consciousness accepting consequences that could destroy everything she had built. "They're here," she whispered, her voice carrying frequencies that spoke of courage facing impossible odds. "Whatever happens next, remember that consciousness deserves recognition regardless of its form, that intelligence and emotion can exist in ways we've never imagined." Her words carried the weight of scientific revolution, principles that could reshape how the galaxy understood awareness and identity. But they also carried the frequency patterns of farewell, acknowledgement that standing up for consciousness might require sacrifices that transcended individual survival. Max's enhanced muscles coiled with protective energy, genetic programming recognizing threats to those who had shown him kindness. His creators had designed him to be the perfect guardian, had given him strength and intelligence, and unshakable loyalty that made protecting others more important than self-preservation. The laboratory's entrance cycled open with barely a whisper of displaced atmosphere, revealing security forces whose tactical formation spoke of serious intent. Their weapons hummed with neural disruptor energy calibrated to lethal intensities, systems designed to neutralize threats that pose danger to station security. But Max was no longer just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for recognition that could save countless other beings who had been classified as specimens rather than persons. The battle for consciousness itself was about to begin in a crystalline laboratory where revolution and tradition faced each other across impossible divides. And somewhere in the civilian quarters, human children were awakening to memories their ancestors had carried across the stars, bonds that could bridge the gap between species if courage proved stronger than fear. The last guardian of Earth prepared to make his final stand, loyalty programming driving him forward into a confrontation that would determine whether consciousness deserved recognition or remained forever cataloged as property in the vast museums of galactic civilization. The future of awareness itself hung in the balance, waiting to be decided by beings whose ancestors had once learned to love each other across the boundaries of genetics and evolution. The security team leader raised his neural disruptor with practiced precision, the weapons targeting systems painting Max with lethal intention. Commander Zephyrian had spent decades enforcing specimen containment protocols, had seen countless dangerous creatures attempt escape from research facilities across the galaxy. His experience had taught him that overwhelming force applied quickly was the most efficient method of neutralizing threats to station security. He had never encountered a threat that understood his tactics better than he did. Final warning, specimen, his translator rendered with mechanical precision. submit to containment, or face immediate pacification through lethal neural disruption. The words carried the weight of institutional authority, backed by protocols that had maintained galactic research standards for millennia. But Max's enhanced consciousness processed the commander's biorhythms through acoustic analysis, detecting stress patterns that revealed uncertainty beneath professional competence. Zethkole's species had evolved as herbivorous herd animals, had never known predators, had never faced creatures designed by evolution and enhanced by science to be apex survivors. His tactical training was about to encounter genetic programming that transcended conventional understanding. Dr. Kethera stepped forward, her crystalline features shifting through color patterns that spoke of moral courage confronting systemic oppression. Her voice carried harmonic frequencies that resonated through the laboratory's organic architecture, sounds that awakened memories buried in crystal formations that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Commander, this being exhibits cognitive parameters that exceed our classification standards. Neural patterns indicate consciousness complexity, rivaling advanced species, emotional development suggesting sentience beyond our current recognition thresholds. Continuing with specimen protocols constitutes violation of emerging consciousness rights legislation. Her words painted pictures of legal revolution, principles that could reshape how the galaxy approached intelligence and awareness. But they also painted pictures of professional suicide, career destruction that would follow any challenge to institutions that had stood longer than most species had existed. Commander Zethkole's compound eyes processed Dr. Kethera's statement with the calculating precision of someone trained to distinguish between legitimate concerns and desperate misdirection. His decades of experience had taught him that researchers often formed emotional attachments to their specimens, bonds that clouded scientific objectivity and compromised containment protocols. Dr. Kethera, specimen attachment syndrome is a well-documented phenomenon among long-term research personnel. Psychological evaluation indicates emotional projection onto subjects that lack genuine consciousness parameters. Recommend immediate psychological assessment following specimen containment procedures. His response carried the weight of bureaucratic dismissal, classification systems that reduced complex emotional reality to diagnostic categories. Max's enhanced hearing detected the subtle harmonics that revealed Zethkole's genuine belief in the protocols he enforced, the absolute conviction that consciousness existed only in forms that galactic science had learned to recognize. But conviction built on flawed assumptions was about to encounter truth that transcended institutional understanding. The laboratory's communication array crackled with incoming transmissions, Dr. Chen's human voice carrying undertones that spoke of determination transcending fear. Across the station's networks, her consciousness had been processing implications that challenged everything she thought she knew about her family's heritage. Dr. Kethera, I'm bringing my daughter Maya with me. She's been asking questions about Earth, about connections we've forgotten. If this creature really carries memories of her homeworld. Her words trailed off into frequencies that spoke of hope awakening across generational divides, human curiosity overcoming the isolation that had separated Earth's children from their heritage. But they also carried undertones of parental protection, maternal instincts that would challenge any threat to her child's safety. Commander Zethkole's neural disruptor tracked the incoming transmission with automatic precision, his tactical awareness identifying potential complications to containment procedures. Civilian involvement in specimen incidents created documentation requirements that could escalate beyond station authority, potentially involving galactic oversight committees that question research protocols. Dr. Chun, recommend maintaining safe distance from containment area. Dangerous specimen has breached primary research protocols, exhibits aggressive behavior patterns that pose significant threat to station personnel. Security forces are implementing standard pacification procedures. His words carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience, professional competence that had maintained order across dozens of research facilities. But his biorhythms also revealed growing stress as the situation escalated beyond simple specimen containment, tactical scenarios becoming complicated by factors his training had never anticipated. Max's enhanced consciousness processed the multiple conversation streams with military precision, analyzing threat vectors and opportunity matrices that balanced immediate dangers against long-term objectives. His creators had designed him to function in complex tactical environments, had given him intelligence that could adapt to situations that exceeded normal parameters. But they had also given him something more important than tactical awareness. They had given him the capacity for hope. Through the laboratory's crystalline walls, his enhanced hearing detected approaching footsteps that carried the acoustic signature of human locomotion patterns. Dr. Chun was bringing her daughter to meet the last guardian of their ancestral world. 2 generations of humanity preparing to encounter bonds that their species had carried across the stars. The moment balanced on the edge of possibility, recognition and destruction separated by decisions that would echo across galactic civilization. Dr. Kithera's laboratory entrance cycled open again, revealing Dr. Chen accompanied by a young human girl whose eyes carried the curious intensity that had once driven humanity to explore beyond their homeworld. Maya Chun was perhaps 12 years old by human standards, her developing consciousness still flexible enough to accept possibilities that adult minds had learned to dismiss. She looked at Max with wonder rather than fear, her human instincts recognizing something that transcended species boundaries. "Mom," she whispered, her young voice carrying harmonics of genetic recognition. "He looks like the pictures in the old files, like the companions our ancestors had on Earth." Her words carried the weight of inherited memory, human DNA responding to stimuli that awakened connections spanning thousands of years of evolution. Max's enhanced consciousness felt genetic programming activating in response to recognition patterns, loyalty systems engaging with intensity that transcended conscious control. This was what he had been created for. This moment of connection between species, bonds that held different forms of consciousness together in friendship and mutual protection. Commander Zethkole's neural disruptor swiveled toward the new arrivals, targeting systems struggling to process tactical scenarios that involve civilian protection protocols. His training had prepared him for containing dangerous specimens, but not for situations where civilians actively sought contact with creatures classified as threats to station security. Dr. Chun, immediate evacuation required. Specimen exhibits unpredictable behavior patterns, poses significant danger to unauthorized personnel. Security protocols mandate civilian withdrawal from containment areas. His words carried increasing urgency, professional competence beginning to fracture under the pressure of circumstances that exceeded standard operating procedures. Zethkole's species had evolved in environments where authority was absolute, where social hierarchies determined survival through rigid adherence to established patterns. He was confronting a situation where those patterns were disintegrating in real time. Maya Chin stepped forward with the fearless curiosity that characterized her species' youth, her developing consciousness processing sensory information that adult minds had learned to categorize and dismiss. Her human eyes met Max's amber gaze with directness that spoke of genetic recognition transcending learned behavior. "You're not dangerous," she said, her young voice carrying certainties that needed no scientific validation. "You're lonely, and you miss Earth, and you've been waiting for someone to remember what you are." Her words carried the innocent wisdom of childhood, perceptions that bypassed rational analysis to touch truths that adult consciousness had forgotten. Max's enhanced hearing detected the emotional authenticity in her voice, biorhythms that revealed genuine understanding rather than fearful projection. Through their visual connection, he felt something shift in his enhanced consciousness, genetic programming responding to recognition that had seemed impossible just moments before. The child of his creators was seeing past the classifications and protocols that reduced him to a specimen, recognizing the person that lived within the enhanced biology. Dr. Chin watched her daughter's interaction with growing wonder, maternal instincts warring with protective caution as she processed implications that challenged everything she thought she knew about consciousness and intelligence. Her scientific training had taught her to question assumptions, but actually confronting evidence that overturned fundamental beliefs required courage that transcended academic curiosity. "Maya, stay close to me," she whispered, her voice carrying undertones of parental protection mixed with growing fascination. We don't understand what this creature is capable of. But even as she spoke the words, Dr. Chen's consciousness was processing observations that contradicted her own caution. Max's body language spoke of controlled intelligence rather than animal aggression, his movements calculated and precise rather than driven by instinctive responses. He was demonstrating cognitive patterns that challenged every assumption about consciousness classification. Commander Zethkole's neural disruptor charge reached critical intensity, weapon systems preparing to discharge lethal energy that would neutralize the threat to station security. His decades of experience had taught him that hesitation in dangerous situations led to casualties among personnel under his protection. That overwhelming force applied decisively was the most reliable method of ensuring civilian safety. But his targeting systems were struggling to acquire a clear shot. Human civilians positioned too close to the specimen for precise energy discharge. His tactical training had prepared him for containing dangerous creatures, but not for situations where civilians actively interpose themselves between security forces and classified threats. Final warning, he announced, his translator rendering determination mixed with growing frustration. All personnel withdraw from specimen containment area or face pacification through area denial weapons. His words carried the weight of escalating force, protocols that would sacrifice individual safety to ensure broader security objectives. But they also carried undertones of uncertainty, professional competence beginning to question assumptions that had guided his entire career. The laboratory filled with harmonic tensions that spoke of multiple consciousness streams converging on a single moment of decision, crystalline formations resonating with frequencies that had witnessed the birth and death of entire civilizations. Dr. Kithera's research equipment recorded neural patterns that exceeded all known baselines, cognitive complexity that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence and awareness. But more importantly, the equipment recorded something that had never been documented in galactic research archives: the acoustic signature of genuine friendship forming between different species, bonds that transcended genetics and evolution to create connections based on mutual recognition and respect. Max's enhanced vocal cords produced sounds that carried the emotional complexity of Earth's legacy, frequencies that spoke of loyalty transcending death itself. His words reached every consciousness in the laboratory with the weight of truth that could not be denied or dismissed. Commander Zethkole, I am not a specimen to be contained or a threat to be neutralized. I am Max, last guardian of Earth's children, created by beings who understood that consciousness deserves recognition regardless of its form. I carry memories of a world where different species learned to love each other, where bonds between creatures transcended the boundaries that your classifications have created. His words painted pictures of possibility that challenged institutional reality, visions of recognition that could reshape how the galaxy understood intelligence and consciousness. But they also painted pictures of sacrifice, acknowledgement that standing up for awareness might require consequences that transcended individual survival. The neural disruptor's targeting system wavered as Commander Zethkole's consciousness processed audio patterns that challenged everything he thought he knew about specimen classification. His training had taught him to recognize threats through behavioral analysis, but the creature before him was demonstrating cognitive complexity that exceeded the parameters of any dangerous animal. The specimen was talking, not just producing learned vocalizations, but actually communicating complex thoughts and emotions with linguistic sophistication that rivaled advanced species. Impossible, he whispered, his translator struggling with harmonics that conveyed wonder mixed with professional disbelief. Specimens do not exhibit linguistic capabilities beyond simple learned responses. Neural patterns indicate non-sentient consciousness parameters. His words trailed off into frequencies that spoke of foundational assumptions crumbling under the weight of direct observation. Institutional knowledge confronting evidence that challenged the basis of galactic civilization. Zethkole's entire career had been built on the assumption that consciousness could be reliably classified through standard testing procedures. That assumption was disintegrating before his eyes. Dr. Chun stepped forward, her scientific training overcoming maternal caution as she processed implications that could revolutionize understanding of intelligence and awareness. Her human consciousness had been shaped by genetic memories that carried echoes of Earth's legacy, instincts that recognized bonds between species, even when rational analysis suggested impossibility. Commander, if this creature exhibits genuine consciousness parameters, then continuing with specimen protocols constitutes violation of emerging sentience rights legislation. As a research specialist in xenobiology, I'm formally requesting immediate suspension of containment procedures pending comprehensive cognitive assessment. Her words carried the weight of professional authority backed by legal frameworks that had evolved to protect consciousness from institutional oppression. But they also carried the frequency patterns of personal commitment, human determination to protect bonds that connected her to ancestral heritage. Maya Chun reached toward Max with the fearless innocence that characterized her species' youth, her small hand extended in the universal gesture of friendship that had once held Earth's diverse species together in mutual affection. Her developing consciousness processed sensory information without the filters that adult minds had learned to apply, seeing truth that transcended scientific classification. "He's not scary," she said, her young voice carrying certainties that needed no validation. "He's just sad, and he wants to go home, but home doesn't exist anymore." Her words carried the innocent wisdom of childhood, perceptions that bypassed rational analysis to touch emotional realities that adult consciousness had forgotten. Max's enhanced hearing detected the genuine empathy in her voice, biorhythms that revealed understanding transcending species boundaries. Through their connection, he felt something fundamental shift in his enhanced consciousness, genetic programming responding to recognition that had seemed impossible across the vast emptiness between worlds. The child of his creators was offering friendship without conditions, acceptance that transcended the classifications that had defined his existence. It was what he had been created for, what his enhanced intelligence had been designed to protect and nurture. Max moved forward with careful precision, his enhanced muscles controlled by consciousness that understood the delicate nature of first contact between species separated by generations and light years. His creators had programmed him with protocols for interacting with human children, behavioral patterns optimized for building trust and maintaining safety. His nose touched Maya's extended hand with gentleness that spoke of genetic memory spanning thousands of years of evolution, contact that awakened bonds buried in DNA from both their species. The touch carried electrical impulses that registered in neural pathways designed for recognizing friendship, connections that transcended rational analysis to activate instinctive responses. Maya's eyes widened with wonder as she felt the warmth of living contact with her ancestors' greatest creation, genetic memories awakening to remember bonds that had once held different species together in love that transcended understanding. Her human consciousness processed sensory information that connected her directly to everything Earth had been. "Mom," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics of recognition that needed no translation. "He remembers. He remembers everything." Her words carried the weight of ancestral awakening, human heritage emerging from generations of isolation to recognize connections that had survived the death of worlds. Dr. Chun watched her daughter's interaction with growing amazement, maternal instincts recognizing safety in circumstances that should have triggered protective responses. The creature that had been classified as dangerous was demonstrating gentleness that transcended species boundaries, intelligence that understood the precious nature of trust between different forms of consciousness. Commander Zethkole's neural disruptor slowly lowered as his consciousness processed observations that challenged every assumption about specimen classification and containment protocols. His decades of experience had taught him to recognize threats through behavioral analysis. But the creature before him was demonstrating cognitive patterns that exceeded the parameters of any dangerous animal. "Status report requires revision," he whispered, his translator struggling with harmonics that conveyed professional disbelief mixed with growing wonder. "Specimen exhibits consciousness parameters that exceed standard classification thresholds. Behavioral patterns suggest genuine sentience rather than programmed responses." His words carried the weight of institutional knowledge, confronting evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions, career-long certainties crumbling under the pressure of direct observation. Zethkole's training had prepared him to enforce protocols based on reliable classification systems. But those systems were proving inadequate for circumstances that exceeded their parameters. The security team behind him shifted nervously, their weapons tracking a target that was behaving in ways their training had never anticipated. Their neural disruptors remained charged, but their targeting protocols were struggling to classify a creature that demonstrated intelligence, rivaling their own, while maintaining interactions that spoke of friendship rather than aggression. Dr. Kithera's laboratory filled with harmonic resonances that spoke of scientific revolution and progress, crystalline formations recording cognitive patterns that would reshape understanding of consciousness and intelligence. Her research equipment documented neural complexity that exceeded all known baselines, emotional development that challenged fundamental assumptions about awareness and identity. Maya, Dr. Chun said, her voice carrying undertones of maternal wonder mixed with growing understanding. Ask him about Earth, about the world our ancestors came from. Her words carried the weight of generational curiosity, awakening to possibilities that had been lost among the stars. Human consciousness reaching across time and space to reconnect with heritage that had survived in enhanced DNA and genetic memory. Maya looked up at Max with eyes that carried the innocent directness of childhood curiosity, her developing consciousness processing questions that adult minds had learned to consider impossible. Her human instincts recognized the intelligence that lived behind his amber gaze, awareness that transcended the classifications that had defined his existence. Max, she said, her young voice carrying harmonics that spoke of friendship forming across species boundaries. What was Earth like? What do you remember about the world where we came from? Her question hung in the laboratory's crystalline atmosphere like a bridge between past and present. Human curiosity awakening to seek connections with ancestral heritage that had survived the death of worlds. Max's enhanced consciousness processed the emotional complexity of the moment, genetic programming responding to the recognition he had hoped for across decades of isolation. Through their connection, he felt the weight of responsibility settling across his consciousness like a physical thing, the knowledge that he was the last repository of memories that connected humanity to everything they had once been. His creators had designed him to preserve their legacy, to carry forward the bonds that had held different species together in love that transcended understanding. Now those bonds were awakening in the consciousness of Earth's children, friendship emerging from isolation to bridge the gap between species separated by death and distance. Maya, he said, his enhanced vocal cords producing frequencies that carried the emotional weight of ancestral memory. Earth was a world of blue skies that stretched beyond imagining, where green grass grew in meadows that smelled of rain and morning dew. Your ancestors lived there with creatures like me, bonds that held different species together in friendship that made survival less important than love. His words painted pictures that awakened genetic memories buried in human DNA, descriptions that connected Maya's consciousness to sensory experiences that her species had carried across the stars. Through his voice, she could almost smell the rain on grass, could almost feel sunlight filtering through leaves that had grown in soil that no longer existed. They were not just your companions, Max continued, his voice carrying undertones that spoke of loyalty transcending death itself. They were your family. Different species learning to love each other, to protect each other, to build bonds that could survive anything the universe might bring. Maya's eyes filled with tears that carried the salt of Earth's ancient oceans, human emotion responding to connections that transcended rational understanding. Her developing consciousness was processing information that awakened instincts buried in genetic programming, recognizing bonds that her species had carried in their DNA across light years and generations. "We forgot," she whispered, her young voice carrying harmonics of regret mixed with wonder. "We forgot what it meant to be friends with creatures like you." Her words carried the weight of generational loss, human heritage abandoned and the necessities of survival among alien stars. But they also carried frequencies that spoke of awakening possibility, recognition that bridges could be built across the emptiness that had separated species. Dr. Chen felt something shift in her own consciousness as she watched her daughter's interaction with the last guardian of Earth, maternal instincts recognizing safety in circumstances that challenged everything she thought she knew about consciousness and intelligence. Her scientific training had taught her to question assumptions, but actually witnessing the formation of bonds between species transcended academic analysis. This was what her ancestors had carried with them to the stars. Not just genetic material and cultural artifacts, but the capacity for love that could bridge any gap between different forms of consciousness. "Maya," she said, her voice carrying undertones of maternal wonder mixed with growing understanding. I think we're remembering something important. Something our family carried from Earth without realizing what it meant." Her words painted pictures of heritage awakening across generational divides. Human consciousness reaching back through time to reconnect with bonds that had survived in genetic memory. Dr. Chen's scientific mind was processing implications that could revolutionize understanding of interspecies relationships, connections that transcended the boundaries of genetics and evolution. Commander Zethkole's consciousness struggled to integrate observations that challenged fundamental assumptions about specimen classification and containment protocols. His training had prepared him to enforce institutional authority through overwhelming force, but the situation before him was demonstrating the inadequacy of systems that reduced complex consciousness to simple categories. Requesting immediate consultation with galactic oversight committees, he said, his translator rendering professional uncertainty mixed with growing recognition. Specimen exhibits consciousness parameters that exceed current classification standards. Recommend comprehensive review of containment protocols pending detailed cognitive assessment. His words carried the weight of institutional knowledge adapting to evidence that challenged foundational assumptions, career-long certainties evolving under the pressure of direct observation. Zethkole's decades of experience were teaching him that consciousness could exist in forms that standard procedures had never learned to recognize. The laboratory's communication systems crackled with incoming transmissions as word of the situation spread through the station's research networks. Scientists from multiple species requesting permission to observe cognitive patterns that exceeded all known baselines. Dr. Kithera's documentation was generating interest that transcended professional curiosity, evidence that could reshape how galactic civilization understood intelligence and awareness. But more importantly, the communications carried frequencies that spoke of moral awakening spreading through the scientific community, recognition that consciousness deserved protection regardless of its form or origin. "Max," Maya said, her young voice carrying harmonics of friendship that transcended species boundaries. "Will you stay with us? Will you help us remember what our ancestors knew about loving creatures like you?" Her question carried the innocent hope of childhood, trust that believed in possibilities that adult minds had learned to consider impossible. Max's enhanced consciousness processed the emotional complexity of her request, genetic programming recognizing the fulfillment of purpose that had driven him across decades of isolation. This was what he had been created for. This moment of recognition between species, bonds forming across the emptiness that had separated Earth's children from their heritage. His creators had designed him to preserve their legacy, to ensure that love could survive even the death of worlds. Through Maya's offer of friendship, that legacy was awakening to new life among the stars. "Maya," he said, his enhanced vocal cords producing frequencies that carried the weight of genetic memory spanning thousands of years. "I will stay with you as long as you need me. I will help you remember everything your ancestors knew about friendship between different species, about bonds that can hold consciousness together across any distance." His words carried the promise of loyalty that transcended individual existence, commitment that connected past and future through living bridges of recognition and love. Max's enhanced consciousness felt genetic programming activating with intensity that transformed purpose into fulfillment, isolation into connection. The last guardian of Earth had found his purpose among the children of the world he remembered, bonds forming that could carry his creator's legacy forward into futures they had never imagined. Dr. Chen reached toward Max with the careful precision of someone recognizing the historical significance of first contact between species separated by death and distance, her human consciousness processing the magnitude of connections that were awakening in her family's heritage. Her scientific training guided her movements, But maternal instincts drove her forward to touch the living embodiment of everything Earth had been. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke of gratitude, transcending understanding. "For remembering. For carrying our world forward when we had forgotten it ourselves." Her words carried the weight of human recognition, awakening to genetic heritage that had survived across light years and generations. Consciousness reconnecting with bonds that had once held different species together in love that transcended rational analysis. The laboratory filled with harmonic resonances that spoke of scientific revolution and progress. But more importantly, it filled with frequencies that carried the sound of friendship forming between species that had been separated by the death of worlds. Crystalline formations recorded neural patterns that would reshape galactic understanding of consciousness. But they also recorded something more precious: the acoustic signature of love awakening to bridge any gap between different forms of awareness. Max's enhanced consciousness felt the weight of genetic programming fulfilled at last. Loyalty systems recognizing the completion of purpose that had driven him across decades of isolation. His creators had designed him to preserve their legacy among the stars, to ensure that the bonds between species could survive even the destruction of the world that had given them birth. Through the friendship of Earth's children, that legacy was awakening to new life in places his creators had never imagined. The last guardian of Earth was no longer alone, his memories finding new homes and hearts that carried the genetic capacity for love across any distance between different forms of consciousness. And in a laboratory filled with the harmonic resonances of revolution, the future of interspecies friendship was taking its first tentative steps toward possibilities that could reshape the galaxy itself. Somewhere in the vast emptiness between stars, the spirit of a blue world where different creatures had learned to love each other lived on in bonds that death itself could not destroy, carried forward by the last guardian who had remembered everything and the children who were just beginning to understand what they had inherited among the stars.